Hello and welcome. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing a friend, Dr. Cara Flamer, who specializes in women's hormones, who has been doing it for over a decade. And one of the reasons I'm curious to kind of pick her knowledge and her experience is because we have a lot of women who are asking the same question. What about bioidentical hormone therapy? I've heard so much about it. So I decided to invite Dr. Flamer and get her perspective on what is this all about. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of women experience at different times in their life. They'll sense that their hormones are out of balance, and it's not something that is really, they might take it to their doctor, but their doctor would say, let me test you. If not, maybe not even, they may not test them. But if they test them, they might be told everything looks normal. But like a woman's sense is that things are out of balance. And even before I got into this field of bioidentical hormones, I remember specific women patients coming to me, they were about in their 30s, and they'd say, like, every month I feel off, like I know something's going on, test me. And I'm an open-minded, I was a conventional doctor, but open-minded. So I said, okay, I'll test you. I kind of know that the results are going to show normal, but like, let's do this anyways, because I hear you. So we test them and everything did look normal, but it's because it depends on the eye that you're looking with. So if you look with an integrated medical eye, you'll see things, or you'll recognize the limitations of the test, and you'll know that you can test in other ways to see the results. So for me, I believe that there was other things we just weren't capturing. Now, of course, I know there's other forms of testing like salivary and urine, but a lot of women, I think even just realizing that their intuition's usually right is very reassuring.
Well, as we spoke about this last week, many women kind of present with different symptoms. And unfortunately, they're not getting the care that they should be getting from their physicians for many different reasons. Sometimes physicians even refuse to test. It's a simple blood test, and especially women in perimenopausal or menopausal kind of age or state of their life suffer from a lot of symptoms. So you mentioned that you're not only kind of doing blood tests, but you're also looking at salivary and urine. Can you kind of explain why and what is it that you see with these additional forms of testing?
Yeah. It's fascinating. It really is. So you can do a blood test. Now, the first thing about hormones and blood work is you're looking at a blood level, and the blood level will change by the day, by the time of the month, possibly even by the minute of the day, right? But more relevant than that is that you're seeing what's in the blood, but not necessarily how it's being used in the tissue. You're not seeing if what was in the blood actually made it to its target, got into the cell, had cell-to-cell communication and relayed a message. You don't really see that whole pathway. You just see sort of the beginning of what's in the blood. So I was doing a lot of salivary testing in the beginning of my career, and saliva testing looks at the functional level of hormone in the tissue. So if you do a blood test for a woman and let's say her progesterone and estrogen balance looks normal, if you were to do a saliva test, which basically involves spitting in a tube in the morning, you may see something very different. You might find that the estrogen's really high, and you might find the progesterone's really low. And that's because what's ended up in the tissue was different than what was in the blood. So the saliva test is really good for measuring functional deficiencies. The urine test is also wonderful because it looks at the metabolites. So whatever the hormone was doing in the blood, how it kind of converts into other things, which are what we call metabolites, and then ends up in the urine. You can kind of track the life cycle of that hormone. So on a urine test, you may see that, let's say, estrogen levels are really high, which you may not have picked up on a blood test. And progesterone, again, often is really low relative to estrogen. It's all relative. But you will see exactly what the issue is on that testing. Now, sometimes you don't, because maybe, again, even with the urine test, which is 4 samples of urine in 24 hours, the levels may change by the day. So you could get off a little bit. Sometimes they see those results and they look fine, but it's still, even from my perspective, we have to take into account the story, the patient's symptoms, and the test, but not just one thing. It's never really just one thing. But those extra levels of testing often do provide the insights. They can also tell us how a woman is metabolizing her hormones. Is she detoxing properly? Does she need some vitamin support? So you can actually get a wealth of information from those tests as well.
So I'm glad you brought this up, because many women will say, well, my hormones are kind of came back normal. So what does that mean? The test result came back normal. Does that mean that we're going to ignore her symptoms? And I'm glad that you brought this up, that, the most important thing is whether or not someone has symptoms. The testing is just to confirm one way or another what's needs to be kind of tweaked with.
You're right. We're not just like treating a test result, right? We're treating a person. And I think that even recognizing that our testing is so limited, even with the amazing private tests you can still do today, like obviously it's limited, right? So if I can't see something, does it negate the problem? Like just because my brain can't see what, on a piece of paper. So I think you're right. Like we really need to appreciate the person, and their experience is obviously the most relevant thing. And of course, we need to factor in emotional triggers and stress and traumas that can also lead to symptoms, but that can also be manifested physically as well.
So speaking about emotional things, in the last couple of years, I think we have all experienced quite an interesting emotional period. Can we talk about stress? Because a lot of people are affected by stress. Can we talk about stress and how it affects women's hormones?
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so much to say about that. So stress is kind of insidious. Like it's not always the external stress that we think of, right? So stress can be imposed on us externally. Things happen that shake us up or that we have to deal with. Stress can be also, we can stress ourselves by ruminating and obsessing, right? Like we create our own stress, and it's not to blame or judge anyone. We all do this, right? So we can do that. But stress can also be hidden inside the body. It can be because of vitamin deficiency. It can be a stress on the body. If you have a gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, like anything going on in different organs, the types of things you'd work with a naturopath on, that can cause stress. So there's a whole physiology inside that can create stress, even if we feel like we're at peaks and our life is great, right? Mm-hmm. So targeting that and addressing and figuring out where the stress is coming from can be really helpful. Not to mention also the way we're born into the world and the way that we're raised can also affect our cortisol levels. Like a lot of the patients that I meet with, they report in childhood having like a really stressful childhood. Maybe there was abuse, maybe other types of stress. And of course that affects adrenal function and physiology even at that stage. And that kind of leaves like a physical and maybe even an energetic imprint in the body as the person is getting older. And not to mention, we have beliefs that we form about the world and ourselves when we're young that we carry forward that can also become a source of stress as we age, especially if we have limiting beliefs about ourselves and our ability to cope in this world.
So as stress kind of eventually goes down to the adrenal level and adrenals are pushing out cortisol, what's the cascade and how does it impact, let's say, progesterone production?
Yeah, so, in the beginning, we make a lot of cortisol to meet our needs. That's a survival mechanism, and that's wonderful. Cortisol it's the fight or flight hormone, right? It helps us meet our deadlines, get everything done. It helps us survive. The body will always prioritize making cortisol for survival. So if somebody has been under stress, usually this is long-term chronic stress for quite a while, eventually it's very hard for the adrenals to pump out all that cortisol. Sometimes the communication between the brain and the adrenal becomes sort of sluggish and the adrenals aren't as responsive. So you can get underproduction of cortisol. That's what is famously known as adrenal fatigue, although there are many phases of adrenal fatigue. The initial phase being high cortisol, the later phase being kind of a burnout, low cortisol. Right. When that happens, what happens is there's a shunt. So progesterone that gets made after ovulation, instead of acting like progesterone in the body to balance estrogen, it's going to be shunted into making cortisol because that's survival. So anyone going through chronic stress, your body's like, I need every piece of ingredient I can make to make cortisol. So we don't need estrogen or we don't need progesterone for survival. So let's just shunt it into cortisol. And so that helps, it's compensating. What also can happen is thyroid hormone production can drop as well from the high cortisol usually suppresses thyroid function. So then you get maybe some thyroid symptoms as well, some more fatigue. When you're in a state of high cortisol, often it's associated with estrogen dominance. I'm not sure right now of the exact mechanism, but it's associated with higher levels of circulating estrogen. Sometimes the cortisol affects the gut. You might have constipation, and then you build up more estrogen because you're not excreting it in the stool. We also know that DHEA, another adrenal hormone that's supposed to help balance cortisol, it also gets depleted when we're going through a lot of stress. So this whole picture leads to a woman showing up as tired, moody, brain foggy with PMS, which is like many women out there.
Yeah. And so let's start maybe from the perimenopausal to menopausal kind of range, right? This is where most of the women that probably come to see you, that's the age group, probably from 35 to 60. Yes, 65, something around there. So what happens with depletion of progesterone production? Because again, as you said before, everything has to be in balance. So as women get closer to maybe menopause or menopausal women, all their hormones drop, but for some reason they still stay in the estrogen dominant state because progesterone is no longer there. And you know, if you add, like you mentioned, if you add more cortisol, which is just part of life, some people deal with that better than others, that depletes their progesterone as well, never mind the environmental influence. And so what's the solution?
Great. I just want to say one thing before I even answer that is there are different phases of perimenopause, like you alluded to, right? In the beginning phase, you have progesterone dropping, but estrogen's like a roller coaster, right? It's up and down. And then you have in the later phase, eventually estrogen drops and you have all hormones could be low, right? So you could be estrogen dominant in an earlier, let's say your whole life you were estrogen dominant and in perimenopause, but then later on that estrogen dominance kind of turns into estrogen deficiency and you actually may need estrogen. And that throws off a lot of women because they think of themselves still as estrogen dominant. Mm-hmm. But yeah, to answer your question, the solution is it's never just one thing. I think that when a woman or man, but in this case a woman, optimizes her diet, you know, cutting out sugars and processed foods and inflammatory foods and kind of really cleans up her diet, that can make, in my experience, over 80% of the difference. So most of the women I meet a variety, but a lot of them have cleaned up their diet already and they did report significant improvements. However, it doesn't always take you the distance, right? It doesn't always lead to full resolution, but it makes a huge, huge difference. Some women do great on, diets that incorporate animal protein. Some people prefer vegetarian. I think it's very individual, but in the common theme with all of that is you're eating a whole foods-based diet, cutting out a lot of the chemicals and the processing. So that's one thing. Another thing that you can do is make sure that you're supporting your body with vitamins, because we need vitamins and minerals to make hormone. Specifically, a really big one, just everyone should know about, is the B complex family. We need B vitamins to manufacture hormones. We need them to detoxify hormones so that we don't kind of build them up and end up with products that are kind of damaging. So everyone technically could be taking a B complex. Often the more, as we're going through these phases of hormone shifts, we're also going through a lot of stress, and you also need vitamins when you're going through stress. So working with a naturopath or some type of healthcare practitioner that can optimize your vitamins makes a really big difference. Sometimes that's enough. And then you might still have a little bit of residue left of hormone symptoms, in which case you can either take some herbs that can help to balance hormones. Like a famous one is Vitex or chase tree berry. A lot of people use to boost progesterone. And sometimes that's enough. Often it's not. And then the next step would be, okay, at this point, you've tried everything. You've done lots of really good work on yourself. Maybe you need the help of someone who can offer bioidentical hormones, check your hormones, and give you back some in a compounded, sort of personalized way, just to help support you in those weak areas where you're lacking. Mm-hmm. So it's a combination. There's also an important piece that often gets the least attention, but the mind-body piece, our consciousness, our attitude, our perspective, how we're handling emotions, because all of that's driving some of the stress that we go through. So it's also really good to work with someone to help you kind of uplift your mood, work through whatever struggles you're going through on that level.
Yeah, for sure. I think basically every single conference that I went to on bioidentical hormones, usually, actually it's not usually, it always happens that probably the most important subject is missed, and that's the psycho-emotional component to it. It's much easier to talk about this hormone or that hormone or the vitamin or anything else, but this is a very complicated subject, but definitely needs to be addressed. I understand that you've created a course for women, I guess for men too, that you have on your website. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So it's called You're Not Going Crazy. And I love the title because that's what a lot of women say to me when I meet them. They say, I feel like I'm going crazy. And I heard it so much, I'm like, I have to call my course that. So it's for women going through perimenopause or menopause. And it could be for women with hormone imbalance in general, but most of the women I think will be in that phase. And it basically goes through what's happening in your body, why you're feeling this way, all the different symptoms that you might be experiencing. It talks about the conventional approach to how, a regular doctor might approach this and what treatments they may offer you. And it talks about bioidentical hormones and how that may kind of be appropriate as well, and how that differs from conventional hormones. It goes into the safety, the risks of each one, the benefits. I also talk about different vitamins, supplements, herbs, things that you may, kind of like to do it yourself to help yourself feel better on your own without seeing a practitioner. Mm-hmm. It has a piece about diet and how to optimize your diet. And then the last piece is about the mind-body connection and some tips you can do at home to help get more insights into yourself, to transform some of the darkness you're experiencing, to make it lighter, to help yourself in that way. So it covers all the different levels. And it's really like all of the information that I eventually would share with my patients over time, but all kind of in one, so you can access it at your own pace right away.
So where can I find it?
Oh, so it's on my website, which is drcaraflamer.com. And I have a resources page, and it's right there on the resources page.
Okay, we'll have to include that with the recording. One more thing I wanted to ask you, because a lot of women come and I find that there's a huge gap between testing for and actually diagnosing for issues with thyroid. How does stress relate to thyroid kind of health as well?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, a lot of when people have adrenal symptoms, when there's burnout happening, usually there is an associated thyroid picture as well because of the suppression of the thyroid with cortisol. Also, when progesterone is low, you get some thyroid suppression. So all the hormones that are low when you go through stress can also affect thyroid hormone function. And so in my experience, not everybody experiences that. It's very subtle. And this is my own kind of thing. I don't think everyone believes this, but I believe that the thyroid blood testing that we have is also limited, right? So you can look at your TSH, your T4 and T3. We do know within integrative medicine, we have certain targets that we want to achieve. We want your levels really good, not just okay. Some people have numbers that don't look so great, but they have a great function somehow, right? It's not correlating with how they feel. And we know that what can be happening in the tissues might be a different story. And then you have other people whose levels look great on the blood, but they have like every thyroid symptom under the sun and they feel amazing when they take a thyroid pill. So how do you explain that? So there could be for sure an impact of stress on the thyroid, and it can cause some suppression, and you can usually reverse that when you balance the adrenals and replace with progesterone. That's usually a quick fix, actually. Some patients who have a lot more thyroid symptoms that aren't fixed just with that. It can actually be that there's toxins in the body, heavy metals that are blocking the receptors so that the thyroid hormone can't enter the cell properly. So in some cases, it also kind of benefits the person to work with an integrative doctor, a naturopath, to kind of get rid of some of those factors, and then you'll get your thyroid function back. So it's usually workable.
Yeah, that's great. So do you see women only or men as well?
Most of my practice is women, but I do see men as well, typically men who are closer to the andropause stage, because, you know, men are quite similar to women. I mean, there's different organs in the body, but they have adrenal glands, right? There's stress, there's thyroid, so there's a lot in common. So yes, I definitely see male patients as well.
So how can we find you? How can we get more of your knowledge and understanding and experience?
So you can go to my website, drcaraflamer.com, and maybe we can include a link for that. And then you can email the clinic, you can call the clinic. In my experience, I think email is always a bit quicker. And then my assistant just gets back to you, gives you some information, and books you an appointment. It's pretty straightforward. We have a contact form on the website. I have a Facebook page. I think it's just facebook.com/Dr. Cara Flamer. So you can find me in both of those places.
That's great. Listen, this is a subject that we can talk about for hours, if not for days.
Yeah.
How would you like to end? You know, I always kind of ask people that I have these chats with, what would you like to leave kind of on a positive note at the end of this conversation?
You know, I think I just want to leave women with the idea that if you sense something's off, you're right. You're probably right. You should follow up on that and be an advocate for yourself and get help. Like really, and if your doctor's not giving you the answers you want, persist, because this is your life. And if you're feeling like you're not yourself and you really want to feel yourself again, know that you can. It's possible. It might take a little bit of time. It might be really quick. It doesn't matter. The point is you can get yourself back again. And I think that's the best sort of feeling of all, and that you have a lot of power in this process.
Right. And I guess you're not crazy. So
exactly. And you're not crazy. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate. I hope we can do this again, and we can get kind of delve into some areas with a little bit more kind of insight. And I love kind of your energy and what you bring. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
All right. Thank you.